The day was thick with sorrow, the kind that only a funeral could bring. A cool, damp mist clung to the village, wrapping around each narrow dirt road. The procession moved slowly, as though the weight of grief itself was pressing against the mourners. Above, the sky was a heavy gray, the clouds thick and low, casting the world in a mourning haze. A few stray droplets of rain fell from the heavens, as though nature itself wept alongside the villagers. In the distance, the small church stood, ancient and still, like a silent witness to the passage of time. Please subscribe now for more powerful stories. Your support means the world to me. The wind, soft and whispering, was the only sound that broke the stillness. It carried the cold scent of earth, the dampness of a burial site just beginning to be sealed, and the faint memory of lives long gone. The funeral carriage, old and worn, stood quietly at the edge of the road, drawn by a horse whose age seemed to mirror the carriage itself. Its coat was dark, streaked with sweat, its mane tangled and wild. The horse stood still, its eyes fixed forward, unnervingly motionless. The procession trudged on, its pace slow and deliberate, as if every step was weighed down by invisible burdens. The mourners, draped in black, moved as one. Some huddled together for comfort, others drifting in solitude, lost in their own grief. Yet, even amidst this shared silence, something felt wrong. The air, too still, seemed as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something unspeakable to unfold. But despite the heavy silence, one sound persisted, the soft clop of hooves on dirt. Michael, the driver, sat silently at the reins, his gaze distant, his mind adrift. He had been hired for this simple task, nothing more. A stranger to the village, a hired hand, like so many others. His work in funerals had been a quiet, forgettable rhythm. Yet today something was different. A gnawing unease tugged at him, though he couldn't quite place its source. It was the horse, its unsettling stillness that seemed to resonate with an unnatural calm. Michael had worked with horses all his life, but this one, standing frozen at the head of the procession, was like no other. It didn't shift, didn't move, its dark eyes staring ahead as if in some trance. A sense of unease settled in Michael's chest, deepening with every passing second. The mourners moved forward, but the horse remained rooted in place. Michael gently tugged at the reins, urging the animal to move, but it refused. This wasn't normal. He could feel the shift in the air, something unseen and inexplicable. The procession inched ahead, but the horse stood unmoving, as if downed by some invisible force. "Oh, come on, just keep moving," Michael muttered, his voice low and tinged with frustration. But the horse remained still, its eyes as dark and endless as the sky above. For a moment, Michael thought he saw a flicker of something in those eyes, something distant, something beyond the present moment, before it was gone, before he could fully grasp it. Again, the procession began to move. The horse followed briefly, but as the carriage passed an old oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching up like twisted hands, the horse froze once more. This time, it wasn't a simple stop. The animal's body tensed, and with a sudden force, its hooves dug into the earth, almost jerking Michael from his seat. The reins slipped from his grasp for a moment before he regained control, his heart pounding in his chest. "Wait, does it keep stopping?" Michael whispered to himself, the question hanging in the still air. His voice, barely a murmur, seemed to echo back at him, unanswered. He had no idea how much weight those words carried, how they would soon lead him into a mystery far darker than he could imagine. Around him, the mourners continued their journey, moving with a strange rhythm, their heads bowed in reverence, their faces hidden beneath their hoods. Not a single one of them glanced back. Not a one acknowledged the horse's odd behavior. Michael's confusion deepened. his gaze wandering to the village elder, a frail, quiet man who stood at the rear of the procession. His face was unreadable, his hands clasped neatly before him, but there was something in his eyes, a knowledge Michael couldn't quite reach. "What's going on with you?" Michael asked the horse, his voice growing sharper. The unease inside him had turned into something darker. Something was wrong here. Something that the villagers, with all their silence and distance, were refusing to reveal. He could feel it in the air, the way they moved, the way they avoided looking at him. He was an outsider and intruder, and they wanted him to stay that way. Then, with another low snort, the horse moved forward again, but only for a few steps. Then, it stopped. Again. Michael's mind raced. What was going on? Why did the horse keep halting? And why was no one reacting to it? A cold dread settled over him. This wasn't random. It couldn't be. The horse wasn't acting on its own. There was something deliberate in its pauses, something purposeful. And, as Michael's grip tightened on the reins, he realized that the strange behavior of the horse was somehow tied to the secrets buried in this village. Secrets that were now beginning to claw their way into the open. As the procession drew nearer to its final destination, the old church loomed larger against the gray sky. Yet, even as they neared the church's ancient gates, the horse slowed once more noticeably this time. Michael's heart pounded. Why was it stopping here? What was it about this place that had the horse acting so strange? He glanced again at the mourners, and this time one of them, a frail old woman, looked up at him. Her eyes were cold, piercing, and strangely knowing. Michael froze, a chill running down his spine. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And as the procession neared its end, he realized that the answers he sought would come at a cost greater than he could have ever imagined. The horse was no longer just part of the procession. It had become something else. A sentinel. A guardian of secrets long buried. And Michael, who had come here to perform a simple task, was now about to uncover something much darker. The final piece of the puzzle was within reach. But would he dare to face it? As the procession crawled along the winding dirt road, the horse's movements grew more deliberate with each pause. At first it seemed like little more than an inconvenience, a stubborn animal slowing down the day. But now, each stop felt intentional, as if the animal itself was imposing a rhythm. The air, thick with sorrow, seemed to grow heavier with every moment, the tension hanging like a storm cloud. The mourners, once statuesque in their silence, began to shift. Hands clenched and unclenched, eyes darted nervously, avoiding the horse. With every stop, the horse's behavior became increasingly unsettling. Its posture stiffened, its legs locking as though bracing against an unseen force. Its eyes, once dull and listless, darkened, reflecting something unseen by the rest of the world. Michael yanked on the reins again, his voice firm but betraying a thread of unease. "Come on now, enough of this," he urged. The horse answered with a low guttural sound, so deep and strange that the nearest mourner flinched, their face paling. The whispers among the mourners started as quiet murmurings, but grew louder with each pause. "What's wrong with the horse?" someone whispered, barely audible. Another mourner shot them a sharp, almost pleading look, shaking their head. It was as though speaking the words aloud was a violation of some unspoken rule. Michael caught the whispers, each one scratching at his curiosity, but the more he tried to make sense of the situation, the more questions piled up. Why was the horse acting like this? A young woman near the back of the group caught his attention. She seemed especially uneasy, clutching her black shawl as if for dear life. She whispered something to the man beside her, who immediately shook his head, eyes wide with warning. Her gaze flickered to the carriage and quickly darted away, as though looking too long might curse her. The tension was palpable, and Michael's patience was starting to wear thin. He wasn't used to being ignored, and the mourners' strange reactions only deepened his frustration. He leaned forward in his seat, glancing at the elderly funeral director at the head of the procession. "Excuse me," he called, raising his voice over the rustling leaves. The old man didn't acknowledge him, but Michael persisted. "What's going on with the horse? It won't move right." The funeral director paused and slowly turned. His face was pale, eyes hollow, as though he hadn't slept in days. He studied Michael for a long moment before answering, his voice low and cautious. "It's nothing. Just keep moving. Don't ask questions." Michael blinked, caught off guard by the abruptness. "Don't ask questions?" he repeated, incredulous. "I've been doing this job for years, and I've never seen anything like this. The horse? Something's wrong with it. What's going on?" The old man's gaze flickered to the horse, then back to Michael. "No one asks those questions here," he said softly, as if pleading, before turning away and resuming his slow walk. Michael froze, his mind racing. The brief exchange left him more confused than ever. Frustration gnawed at him, but now curiosity had taken over. This wasn't just an animal acting up. It was something else, something deeper. His hands gripped the reins tighter, a cold prickle crawling up his spine. He glanced at the mourners again, their faces hidden beneath veils and hats. Were they as in the dark as he was? Or were they hiding something? He couldn't tell, but he was determined to find out. As the procession trudged on, Michael noticed more strange details. The whispers among the mourners had grown bolder, though still fragmented and elusive. He strained to catch fragments of conversation. "It always happens with this carriage," one voice murmured. Another responded, hushed but urgent. "Didn't he know? Didn't they tell him it was that horse?" The phrase, "that horse," hit Michael like a punch to the gut. His heart quickened. What did they mean? What was so special, or cursed, about this horse? He glanced at the animal again. Its dark eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking, as if it could sense the weight of the whispers, understanding them more clearly than Michael ever could. The procession reached a bend in the road where a twisted, gnarled tree stood, its branches stretched like skeletal arms, casting long shadows over the path. As they approached, the horse stopped again, its halt so sudden that Michael was nearly thrown from his seat. He barely managed to catch himself, gripping the edge of the carriage. "Damn it!" he muttered, pulling harder on the reins. But the horse remained immovable, its hooves dug deep into the earth, its body taut with tension. Michael stared, frustration turning to fear. Something was terribly wrong. Behind him, the murmurs of the mourners had shifted into an uneasy hum. Michael could feel their eyes on him, though none of them spoke directly. He turned to face them, his voice sharp and demanding. "What's going on here? Someone tell me what's happening." The mourners exchanged glances but remained silent. Michael's gaze locked with the elderly funeral director again. The old man had stopped walking, his back to the group, but his eyes were fixed on the carriage. For a long moment they stared at each other, Michael's confusion and frustration meeting the old man's unreadable expression. Fear? Guilt? Something darker? "Tell me," Michael pressed, his voice rising, "what's wrong with this horse?" The funeral director hesitated, then shook his head slowly. "It's not the horse," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's what the horse sees." Michael froze, his breath caught in his throat. The words sank in, slow and heavy. What the horse sees. The phrase rippled through him, a chill creeping up his spine. What could the horse possibly see that no one else could? The thought twisted in his gut, making his hands tremble on the reins. As the procession lingered in silence, the air grew thicker, oppressive. The mourners shifted uneasily, the whispers turning into a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. Michael's mind raced, desperately trying to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. The horse's strange behavior, the funeral director's cryptic words, the hushed murmurs. It all pointed to something much darker, something beyond a simple funeral. Michael thought back to the funeral director's words. It's not the horse, it's what the horse sees. The thought gnawed at him. Could it be possible? Could the animal really be sensing something unseen, something otherworldly? He had always been a man of logic, grounded in reality, but now reality seemed to be slipping away. As the whispers around him swelled, Michael caught another fragment of conversation. "They should have burned the carriage years ago," a woman whispered, her voice trembling. "But they didn't. And now it's back." Another voice cut in, harsh and urgent. "Quiet, he doesn't know. Don't scare him." Michael's jaw tightened. His patience was gone. He turned to face the mourners, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "I don't know what's going on here," he said firmly, "but I'm going to find out. Someone needs to tell me the truth." The mourners fell silent, their eyes averted. Only the wind rustled through the trees, and the horse snorted faintly, still immovable. Michael's gaze returned to the creature. Its eyes glinted in the dim light, as if it knew something he did not. As the procession began to move again, a renewed sense of determination filled Michael. He didn't know what he was up against, but he was going to uncover the truth. Whatever darkness had taken root in this village, whatever secrets the horse and the carriage hid, he would get to the bottom of it, even if it meant confronting something he couldn't understand. As Michael dug deeper into the unsettling behavior of the horse, he discovered whispers that led him into the shadows of the past, a history darker than he ever could have imagined. The villagers spoke in hushed tones, reluctant to divulge too much, but their words still carried the weight of years of silence. They told stories of a man named Thomas Grayson, a name that sent shivers through the tight-knit village community. Thomas Grayson had once been the most feared and infamous figure in the village. A man of cold steel and even colder blood, he had left a trail of violence and death in his wake. But the horse was an entirely different story. It had been his companion for years, always present at the funerals of those who had crossed Grayson, or worse, those who had been left to die in the wake of his actions. The horse always knew when death was near, an old villager said, her voice quivering as she recounted her memories. You could see it in its eyes. When it was there, you knew someone would be gone by sundown. Michael could hardly believe what he was hearing. The connection between the horse and death was too peculiar to be a coincidence. The villagers seemed to hold a deep respect, if not fear, of the animal. It wasn't just an ordinary horse. It had been linked to the end of many lives in a way that no one had ever fully understood. The whispers suggested the horse had a sixth sense, a deep, inexplicable bond with death itself. Michael's stomach turned as he pieced together the chilling details. Every time the horse appeared at a funeral, someone connected to that death had been marked in a way that couldn't be explained by chance alone. As Michael listened to the stories, he felt the weight of their meaning. The horse, it seemed, had been more than just an animal. It had been a harbinger of death, a silent witness to the violent events of the past. The more Michael uncovered, the more he began to understand that the horse's strange behavior was not mere coincidence. It was reacting to something that had been buried long ago, a connection to the violence that had once stained the land. For the first time, Michael felt a deep sense of unease. Could it be that the horse's strange actions were not random? The more he learned, the more he began to suspect that the animal knew something no one else did. The horse was reacting to a hidden truth, something dark and buried. The question now was, what was it? Michael's quest for answers began to tie the present to the past in ways he couldn't ignore. As the funeral procession continued its somber route through the village, Michael's mind raced. He had learned that the deceased, William Banks, had been more than just another name on the list of mourners. Banks had been closely associated with Thomas Grayson, his right-hand man, in fact. The villagers spoke of them in hushed tones, never mentioning specifics, but the implications were clear. There had been something deeply wrong between them. Michael's instincts told him that the death of William Banks was not the simple tragedy it appeared to be. The more Michael learned, the more the pieces of the puzzle seemed to fall into place. William Banks had been one of the few people who had been close enough to Grayson to know all of his secrets. He had witnessed something horrifying, that had remained buried beneath layers of silence. It was as if Grayson's death had created a rift, one that had yet to be healed, and now the horse was sensing the ripple effects of that unresolved past. But what troubled Michael more than the connection between the deceased and the murderer was the way the horse reacted to this specific funeral. It wasn't just about the death of William Banks. It was about something much deeper, something the horse recognized. The behavior wasn't random. It had been triggered by something the horse had sensed in the air, a connection to the past that no one could see but the animal. Michael started piecing together the vague whispers from the villagers. He overheard snippets of conversations that pointed to a long history of unease about the horse. "It always happens when the old carriage comes back to town," a man muttered to his companion. Didn't he know? Didn't he realize it was that horse? The words echoed in Michael's mind as he pondered their meaning. The more he dug into the history of the horse and its connection to Thomas Grayson, the more Michael began to question the true nature of the death he was witnessing. Was William Banks' death truly a simple tragedy, or was it something far more sinister, something that had been set in motion years before? Michael began to suspect that the horse knew something that no one else did, and it wasn't just reacting to the past. It was reacting to something that had yet to be fully revealed. As Michael's mind churned with these new revelations, he began to realize the gravity of what he was uncovering. The death of William Banks, as tragic as it seemed, might have been the final act in a long-running drama, a drama that had begun with Thomas Grayson and the trail of blood he had left behind, and now the horse was pulling Michael into the heart of that drama, forcing him to confront the questions that the villagers had long avoided. Could it be that the horse had been trying to warn them all along? Was it trying to expose the truth of what had really happened to Grayson and what had truly happened to William Banks? Michael's investigation had just begun, and the deeper he went, the more it seemed that the answers lay hidden beneath a veil of silence, with the horse standing as the only living witness to the secrets of the past. The ominous pauses in the funeral procession, the horse's strange behavior, they were all leading somewhere. Michael could feel it. The truth was waiting to be unearthed, and he had a feeling that the closer he got to that truth, the more dangerous the path would become. The horse, it seemed, was the only one who knew what really happened, and now it was Michael's turn to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. The village felt different now, as though an invisible weight had settled over everything. Michael stood near the edge of the cemetery, the distant sound of mourners murmuring in the background. The horse, still restless, pawed the ground nervously, its eyes darting between the grave and the road. Something was about to break. Michael could feel it. His journey had taken him deep into the heart of the village's darkest secrets, and now he had one final question that could unravel everything. What was really happening here? The funeral director, once composed and reserved, now seemed on edge, shifting nervously under Michael's gaze. The older villagers gathered behind him, silent witnesses to the truth they had long buried. Michael's frustration finally boiled over. I need answers. I can't keep going in circles, he demanded, his voice trembling slightly. What is going on with that horse? Why does it keep stopping? Why is it so terrified? The director hesitated, the lines of his weathered face tightening. Slowly, he turned toward the villagers, his eyes flickering to the ground. It was clear now. The truth had been suppressed for far too long. He swallowed, his voice barely audible. It's Grayson. The horse has always been tied to him after that night, after what happened to him. His words were fractured, as though speaking them was tearing open a wound that had never healed. Grayson was cursed. He'd never left us. Not really. His spirit still haunts this village, Michael. The villagers shifted uncomfortably, their faces pale, as if they had all heard this truth one too many times but never spoke it aloud. It was as if they were afraid that acknowledging it would make it all too real. Grayson? Michael repeated, his heart pounding. The horse is haunted by Grayson's ghost. But why now? Why at this funeral? What does it want? The funeral director didn't respond immediately, his hand shaking as if the words themselves would burn his tongue. Finally, he spoke again, his voice a low rasp. He wasn't supposed to die that way. Not like that. Not with the blood on his hands. The horse, it knows when someone like Grayson, is near. It senses the death coming, like it always has. Michael's blood ran cold. You mean the horse knew this funeral? Knew about William Banks? The director nodded slowly. Yes, William Banks, Grayson's old associate. He was there that night too. They say Banks knew too much. Maybe that's why he's gone now, and why the horse is reacting the way it is. Suddenly, a loud, terrifying snort broke through the conversation, coming from the horse. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural fire as it stared at Michael, as though it understood every word that had been spoken. The air around them seemed to thicken, the oppressive weight of history hanging heavy. Michael felt a cold chill creep up his spine. He knew it wasn't just the horse that had been touched by Grayson's spirit. It was everything, the whole village. A place haunted by blood, guilt, and a truth that had been buried for too long. And now, it was rising again. The atmosphere seemed to crackle with energy as Michael turned toward the horse, whose presence was more ominous than ever. The villagers had told him the story, the full, terrible truth. Grayson, the once feared figure in the village, had met a violent end, shot down in cold blood, surrounded by those who were supposed to be his allies. His death had been swift, brutal, and unceremonious. But it wasn't just his death that cursed the land. It was the things he had done before. It wasn't just the horse that had been touched by Grayson's violent spirit. It was the entire village, the entire landscape, as though the very ground itself had absorbed the weight of his crimes. And now, the horse was merely a conduit, a way for the past to bleed through into the present. Michael's hand tightened around the reins as he looked the horse in the eye. There was no turning back now. He had come too far, learned too much. The spirits of the past weren't just stories. They were real, and they wanted something. Answers. Vengeance. Closure. Show me, Michael whispered to the horse. The animal stared back at him, its nostrils flaring, eyes glowing brighter. Then, as if responding to his words, it suddenly reared up, letting out a deep, unnatural whinny that shook the air around them. The villagers gasped, stepping back. Michael stood his ground, though every instinct in his body told him to run. The world seemed to slow down as the ground beneath them trembled, a low hum vibrating through the earth. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the cemetery. A tall, imposing man, his face partially obscured by shadows. It was as if the very air around him bent and twisted. Michael's heart stopped as the man took a step forward, revealing a faint, ghostly smile. It was Grayson. The figure in front of him wasn't real, not in the way that Michael had understood, but Grayson's spirit, manifesting from the deep, unresolved pain of his death, had come to claim the answers. Michael could feel the weight of the man's gaze, like a physical force pressing against him. "You've disturbed what was meant to remain buried," Grayson's ghostly voice echoed, as though coming from all directions. "And now you will face what was always waiting." The horse pawed the ground, its eyes fixed on Grayson's apparition. The air grew thick with tension as the two entities, living and dead, locked in a final confrontation. The ghost of Grayson seemed to be trying to draw energy from the horse, to use its strange, supernatural connection to the village. But the power of the spirit was waning. Michael took a step forward. "I won't let you haunt this village any longer. It ends now, Grayson. Your secrets, your blood, it all ends." The ghost's eyes narrowed, and in that instant, the horse broke free from its paralysis, charging toward Grayson. The energy between the two collided with the force of a storm, filling the air with crackling energy. Michael, standing in the middle of the chaos, realized something that shocked him to his core. This wasn't just a battle between man and spirit. It was a fight for the soul of the entire village. The ground beneath them cracked open, revealing dark, forgotten memories. Blood-stained soil, torn letters, and the whispers of betrayal. Michael could feel the weight of history crashing down on him, threatening to pull him into the darkness, but he fought it back. With one final surge, the horse let out a deafening whinny, sending Grayson's spirit reeling backward. For a moment, there was a stillness, a heavy silence. Then, the ghost of Grayson disappeared, dissolving into the wind, leaving nothing but the horse standing tall, its body trembling, but free of the burden that had plagued it for so long. Michael stood still, his chest heaving as he stared at the horse. The village was finally at peace. The curse was broken. But the price had been paid. The air in the village had finally grown still. The horse, once trembling and agitated, now stood calmly by the grave. Its body relaxed for the first time in days. The village that had once been haunted by a centuries-old secret was now beginning to breathe again, free from the weight of the past. Michael stood near the cemetery, watching as the last remnants of the ghostly energy faded. The villagers, who had been so burdened by fear and guilt, were slowly coming to terms with the truth. Grayson's spirit had been laid to rest, and the horse, once its tether to the earthly realm, had been freed from its endless cycle of sorrow. The funeral director, who had long lived under the shadow of the past, now approached Michael. His face, though still lined with age, carried a new sense of peace. There was no longer fear in his eyes, only relief. "You did it," the old man said, his voice thick with gratitude. "You gave us the truth, and the curse is finally broken." Michael nodded slowly, his gaze falling on the horse. It seemed almost as if the animal understood, as if it too knew that the darkness had lifted. The pauses, the strange halts during the procession, the ominous behavior, they were all gone now. The village, which had been trapped in time for so long, was now moving forward, shedding the heavy cloak of secrecy and pain. "The road's clear now," Michael said, his voice quieter, almost to himself. He knew it wasn't just about the past, it was about the future that could finally begin without the ghosts of what had once been. And as the villagers began to slowly return to their homes, the horse moved away from the grave, its steps sure and steady. The funeral carriage, which had been a symbol of death, now seemed like a relic of a time that had passed. The procession that had been so full of weight and sorrow had ended with a quiet but profound peace. Over the following weeks, Michael stayed behind, helping the village recover from the deep wounds left by the past. The town, once clouded with fear and suspicion, began to rebuild its sense of community. It was a long road, but the presence of Michael and the knowledge that the village had faced its demons and emerged stronger brought hope to its people. The horse, though forever marked by its past, became something different now. The villagers no longer feared it, no longer whispered about it in hushed tones. Instead, they came to see it as a symbol of resilience, a living testament to the strength it had taken for both the villagers and the horse to overcome their shared trauma. The carriage, which had once seemed so ominous, now served as a simple reminder of the journey they had all taken together, of how something as dark as the past could, with time and understanding, be transformed into something that carried them forward. Michael grew close to the villagers. He was no longer just an outsider, but someone who had helped them rediscover their own sense of hope and healing. He sat with the elderly, listening to their stories, and worked alongside the younger generation to rebuild what had been lost during the years of fear and silence. And the horse? It no longer paused, no longer stopped in the middle of the road. Its presence now a quiet, constant reminder of the peace that had been earned. When Michael would take the reins again, the road was clear, the air lighter. The village, at long last, could breathe. It was a quiet victory, but it was enough. As Michael stood beside the horse one last time, watching the sun set over the village, he felt a deep, personal sense of closure. The story of the horse and its dark past had come full circle. No longer burdened by the supernatural, the village had found its way back to life. And for Michael, who had once been a stranger in a strange land, the place had become home, a home where the weight of the past no longer held sway, and the future could begin in peace. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think was behind the horse's strange behavior? Was it the ghost of Grayson, or something else entirely? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're hungry for more stories like this, hit that notification bell so you never miss an eerie tale. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.